morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to June's meeting of the County Council Executive. So we'll start with agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence, please, Rachel.
Thank you. We have apologies from Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources, and Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services. However, we have Michelle Grady here in place of Andrew Crookham and Joe Kavanagh in place of Heather Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to our substitutes. So, any declarations of councillor interest, please? I'm not seeing any indicated, so I'll take it there are none. Item 3 then, which is announcements by myself or executive councillors or directors. I've just got 2 announcements. One is that following the local government elections, the conversations and discussions about potential devolution deal for Greater Lincolnshire have recommenced at an officer and civil service level, and there is the plan at the moment is to see if there can be a deal proposed for Greater Lincolnshire, which potentially could be agreed and consulted on later this year, with a potential mayoral election in May 2025. So that is ongoing, but obviously lots of work to do to see whether we can get to a situation where we have local agreement, but also government agreement as well at the end of the day. The second one is about the migration situation, in particular the situation or proposals for Scampton. So I'm going to hand over to Chief Exec just to update us on the latest.
Yes, thank you very much. As the executive know, we're in discussions currently with the Home Office about Scampton being the MOD site at Scampton being a large site for asylum seekers. We have been told that the population would be healthy young males, is what we've been told at the moment, and we have been told that the expected number would be 2,000. That would be an expected number of 2,000 on the site at any point in time, and obviously depending on the exit route would clearly depend on how long they would stay there in terms of what the throughput would be. So at the moment we're estimating figures to be about a throughput of 5,000 over a 12-month period. We've got weekly meetings with the Home Office where we continue to discuss funding challenges, the challenges around supporting any migrants who may claim to be under 18, and the various different sort of community needs and security issues. So those meetings are ongoing. We understand that the timeline that the Home Office are seeking to achieve for the first cohort to arrive would be around autumn time, maybe August, September, but that hasn't yet been confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any further announcements anybody wishes to make? I'm not seeing, so I'll then move on to item 4, minutes of the meeting of the Executive held on the 3rd of May. Is it a wish I sign these as a true and accurate record? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Then we move then on to item 5, which is the procurement of active recovery beds for the next period. So good news story. So Councillor Bowkett, do you want to just introduce it?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good news story. This is. It's a joint initiative between health and social care, which obviously is good in itself. It's a shared project. It's been going on now for since last year. These are for 40 active recovery beds for 23-24 financial year. And it is really helping to reduce numbers to get out of hospital, and it's certainly helping not have care needed afterwards as well. It's saving us a lot on care because they're basically going in there for 2 to 3 weeks and then coming out and able to look after themselves. So if I can just pass over to Glenn.
Thank you, Leader. So I'm also joined by colleagues from commercial, from finance, I think, on the line, and also by Andrea Kingdom, who's the head of hospital services. So Andrew's really close to the experience of making best use of the active recovery beds. If I can turn members back in time to October, November, December of last year, you'll appreciate the NHS had significant pressures, mostly focused around ambulance waits and hospitals. And in early December last year, the government made an announcement of additional funding for health and social care to support hospitals, particularly around discharge. One of the elements that we collectively agreed through the Health and Wellbeing Board to invest in was active recovery beds, and the experience of their use has been really quite enlightening, to the point where we know that NHS Region has also considered this a really good example of a relatively novel service that they're expecting other systems around the country to consider as well. Leader, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Questions, comments, please? I think we need to just start with the scrutiny report, actually, as well, which has been circulated. I think Councillor Marfleet is on screen. Yeah. So, Councillor Marfleet, do you just want to summarise what the view of your scrutiny committee was, please?
Thank you. Good morning, Leader and everybody. We have put our comments forward, which are attached in the paper. We went through the item in detail, and the committee fully supports the comments and the paper in front of you. With this ability, we've looked at the averages of the usage, and we have flexibility to cope with surcharges within the system. This is about supporting people that are medically fit to be discharged from hospital. It minimises future reliance on long-term funded care. The aim of the active bed service is not for all hospital discharges. The focus of the service is to support those with complex needs requiring an integrated response and who can improve to enable them to live at home with a reduced package of care. This is highlighted by the success of over 60% of users returning home, and in effect, it's about cost saving as well. Not only does it achieve for those that need the support, but when you look at the hospital beds sitting at around £465 a night compared to this approach of £150 a night, and actually providing the care that those people need. All I can say more is that the committee fully supports this and welcomes this approach in the paper, and it is built on success already, and that is really where we stand, is that it has been a great achievement and success. So we welcome this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in terms of benefits to the hospitals, obviously, because people are able to leave hospital, and I just probably want to investigate the benefits to people to the county council services in terms of people, just a discussion, I suppose, with Andrea's here on paragraph 2.7 is, just talk us through the aspect of, it gives there the sort of the numbers of people who, for example, went back home without any care and so on and so forth. So I suppose the question is, can you just sort of put some flesh on the bones, please, in terms of, from your perspective, how it's working? And I suppose the first question is 40 the right number? Obviously, I'd be interested what your view is in terms of that as well.
40 beds are adequate at the moment. Every day we have about 2 or 3 beds remaining, so there is a flexibility, because we also allow the beds to be used by EMAS to prevent people going to hospital in the first place. So it works for the community as well as hospital discharge. But every day, since the last scrutiny committee, I've kept a record every day of how many beds are left over at the end of the day and for use overnight if required. And there's always been sufficient beds left over. So 40 is more than adequate just at this time. I think in the winter, it might be that would be different, and we might need the additional beds as discussed in the report over the winter. But at this present time, we don't need more than 40.
There's no, I mean, talking about the hospital sector, there's no, they couldn't increase the flow. That seems to be the number which works for Lincolnshire.
Yeah, we're very robust about everybody that goes into that beds, because we have to make sure it's the right person that can show a level of progression. So then immediately we look at what their needs are, and what the outcomes to be achieved from those beds. So we feel that the number that we accept into those beds is right. The number of people that remain medically fit overnight for the remainder of the day have other needs that don't mean they're not appropriate to move to an active recovery bed. If we started moving everybody into those beds, the whole ethos of what they're about will be lost.
And in terms of regression, where it hasn't worked, what can you tell us about that? Because obviously, inevitably, some people, because they're ill, it won't work for them, or they'll end up back in hospital or end up requiring intensive social care support.
Yeah, I think you've almost answered that for me there, Councillor Hill. It's very often, it's that period of recovery that makes a difference for people achieving their identified outcomes that we want to achieve. But I think for some people, they do become unwell again, as is the case when anybody could just go home with a package of care. They do become unwell and do require to return back to hospital. Those that we have to put through a longer package of care will have been after an intense MDT input, so multidisciplinary team input. But actually, whilst we thought hospital, this might be what their needs are, actually they've changed once they've been there.
I mean, it's difficult because obviously we're talking about people who are probably not well or ill, old, getting older. So what percentage of, I don't want to use failure as the right word, but what percentage of people it doesn't work for, shall I put it like that, where they've just had to return back to the system more or less as they were in the first place?
I'm sorry, I don't have the actual percentage number on me, but I would say at least 2/3 we have a successful outcome from. So I'd say of the third that we don't, it's normally they've returned to hospital or they become unwell again.
Do we sort of, I don't suppose you do you monitor how long people manage to stay more fit, shall we say? Because inevitably we all get older and, unfortunately. So is there any evidence to show how long it sort of works for, if I can put it crudely like that?
We keep a record for what happens to people after up to 90 days. That's from hospital discharge as well as the active recovery beds. And I think we've got one of the best scores in the country for people not returning back to hospital or back into services.
Thank you. I mean, this looks brilliant, doesn't it? It's such a sensible thing to be doing. I, probably like Councillor Hill, was slightly surprised that a relatively low number of beds were required. So I'm surprised that there aren't more people we could move into this. And my broader question would be, and almost Dan mentioned the ambulance service, do we see this having an impact on the ability for the acute sector to admit people by virtue of the fact you're freeing up beds in the chain?
I think in relation to EMAS will, if they identify that somebody actually would be appropriate for one of those beds, because right at the start we shared with all the community services about what the criteria would be for the right people to be able to utilise those beds. So EMAS will ring the home directly, and our manager that oversees from adult social care those beds as well and discuss, and they'll say yes, we'll offer a bed to this person, or no, they're not appropriate, they need to go down another route. We have a lower number of beds because we really want to work with a home first principle. So therefore we try and get people home with either our reablement service or supported by LCHS, or what other options are available, using a strength-based approach to that discharge to make sure that we get people home first. Those that we can't are the ones that we look to. What do we need to put in place next to be able to ensure they do eventually go back home? I think every day I get a breakdown of every single person that's on our discharge to assess tracker, and I don't see anybody that we are missing off the list. So I'm satisfied that when we work through, and twice a day we go through every patient that's medically optimised to see who could or could be going home, and if they're not going home, why not? And why not utilising an active recovery bed if that's appropriate? So we're checking twice a day, and we're satisfied that what we're doing at the moment is the correct number.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. When you talk about checking twice a day, and forgive me for not knowing the detail, are you looking at everybody who's in hospital in Lincolnshire?
So every ward has sorry, I don't want to stretch this out, but every ward has an aligned social worker. So from the minute somebody arrives, we're looking to see what will be their discharge pathway. What's the quickest that we can ensure they can safely be discharged rather than remaining in a bed? And then twice a day, the trust print off for us a tracker list that tells us the name of every single patient that is ready for discharge from the hospital. They're reviewed in the transfer of care hub, and then they're identified for which is the right discharge pathway for them. So twice a day we have an update of every patient, because it can change. We might have someone on the discharge list in the morning and then they become not medically optimised later on in the day. So we have the list again, otherwise we might be working on somebody that actually can't be discharged from hospital anyway.
So that's everybody in hospital. You know, you've gone in with a broken leg or an elderly person's had a fall.
Can we just explain how the hospital discharges? Because I don't really know. What's the process?
Right. So of a morning, adult social care attend a ward round, and so they know every patient that's on the ward that's aligned to them. So we can start discharge planning from as soon as they arrive. Then when it's agreed, what we call a whiteboard meeting. So of a morning, they'll say, right, this person is out medically optimised. They don't need to be in hospital any longer because they no longer need consultant-led care. So then they come through on a system from the hospital called WebV, and that will tell us in the transfer of care hub, which is made up of representatives from adult care, LCHS, the reablement service and ULHT, and our third sector partners as well, because we look everywhere to give the right discharge approach. And they sift through all of those names and say, right, this would be the right pathway for them, that's the right. So it could be actually they need to go to adult social care, or they need to go to LCHS, or they might say actually these 3 people here are ideal for an active recovery bed. So because they've got real potential to improve, but they just need that recovery period, a few days to have a few good nights sleep, eat properly, and then we can start their reablement and everything. So we work through all of those, and that's the discharge process we go through. And then if there is anybody that's a concern about, it's escalated through the relevant management structure.
Thank you. Well, I was just going to flip it on the head, because I think it's a valid question saying, do we want more beds or do we need more beds? I suppose my question would be, are we using all the beds that we're looking to procure, really? Because we're 40 or uplift to 60. Are we paying for ones that potentially we're not going to... I appreciate overall it's probably a cost saving, but even so, if we're paying for beds that we don't actually need, that's also a concern.
We don't need them right now because we're still trying to ensure the home first principle, and that's quite usual for this time in the summer. We tend to be able to, it's in the winter when more medical conditions impact on people, especially those with respiratory, and that's when we're going to need those extra beds.
No, appreciate the timescales and when this contract kicks in for the 9 months, etc. But even then, are we going to be having more beds than we potentially need, I suppose? I know it's on what we've looked at before.
I think I'll give Andrew a rest and let Glenn come in and...
Thank you, Leader. So members need to remember that this was one of a number of schemes that we introduced very rapidly in a matter of a couple of weeks in December, when the pressure was on and the profile was incredibly high. What's really interesting to us as officers is that the schemes that we developed very quickly have typically done their job, and the hospital system in Lincolnshire improved as a result of those extra investments. Those investments were made by the government, and the money from the government runs out at the end of this financial year. So there is uncertainty about what happens next at system level, because this is a procurement for both health and social care. So it's a team effort. What we're trying to do, though, is create an environment now where all the things that we have learned over the years, but also the particularly difficult winter we had this last year, and put that into an intermediate care programme, which brings together home first reablement, active recovery beds, a whole range of different services, but better coordinates them and puts them into a longer term business plan that the integrated care partnership would then buy into as a system. So this is one piece of the jigsaw that we're trying to stretch out, make the most of in terms of not just capacity, but also in terms of being able to cope with people who are coming in through the front door, which is just as much of a pinch point for us as people on discharge, so that we start to treat the whole system. That business case is something that we're currently working on across health and social care with our third sector partners. More to follow, but it could lead to another pooling of budgets across health and social care to make this more sustainable, because our experience over the last few years has been very rapid allocations from government for very specific purposes for very limited time, and that's frankly not the best way to run a system. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. It's not a question. I just wanted to say thank you. It was incredibly instructive what I've heard this morning, and this is what we've been waiting for, isn't it? You know, this is something that either will affect us directly or will affect us indirectly through us caring for family members and close friends. So it's invaluable how we are now working in partnership across adult social care through our colleagues and partners in the NHS, and the question that Councillor Davis asked, how is this going to, and Glenn covered off, how we are, what we do has a positive impact on people going in the front door with acute needs. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing how this service develops. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've covered the issue. Obviously this issue of intermediate, this grey area between what is clearly health and what is clearly social care has been a national argument for many years, hasn't it? And many times things haven't happened, and it is encouraging to see that there may be a solution. I suppose the question was obviously in terms of demonstrate, because obviously it is all short term, you know, this is for a year, and then what? And I suppose the issue is, I know the government continues to look at social care reform, and well, reform of both sectors. Is there any chance that we'll nationally get to a stage where there is this sort of fund guaranteed ongoing? Because it would be a tragedy if we just stopped it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. A number of funding streams to the council to pay for social care or health and social care have a 2-year time frame. The Better Care Fund, which we're currently working through at the moment, is a 2-year time frame. And that's become somewhat normal for us. We try to plan longer term, because at the system level, we can get a lot more by planning long term with partners. And I think that's the real challenge for councils, that despite the short-term funding that we've become very accustomed to, planning longer term makes better use of that resource, irrespective of who gets it. Whether it's a health colleague, whether it's the council, it becomes the Lincolnshire pound. So how can we stretch the Lincolnshire pound to last longer and do more? And I think that's a challenge that we will continue to face. The social care reform programme, of course, has been somewhat watered down of late. And I think we would anticipate that after the next national elections, the possibility of longer term funding and longer term planning is something that we would all benefit from. Thank you, Leader.
Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Davey.
Thanks, Lee. I'm not going to say anything other than positive report, really good news. I think the sustainability, the long-term issues have been picked up very well in the discussion. For me, this is a really good example of how local solutions, people working on a local level, could address the big issues. And this disconnect between national policy making and finding local solutions is clearly evidenced in this piece of work. And I think, you know, we should all note that sometimes local politicians do know how to, and local managers do know how to make things work for their communities and their residents better than those sitting in ivory towers in Whitehall.
That's Unless there are any further contributions, the recommendations are on page 11, and there are two, which is basically to award this contract, but also delegate the detail to the director in consultation. So all those in favour of those recommendations, please show. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you for your contribution. Okay, we move on to the next item, item 6, which is another good news story about improvements to various parts of our highways network. So, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, this is really good news, actually. It's a continuation of the Levelling Up Fund scheme. I would add that we're putting, LCC are putting funds in as well. And it's the Greensell roundabout and the Springfields roundabout in Spalding. And fundamentally what we're doing is represents about a £22 million investment to upgrade both those roundabouts, not unlike what's been done at Riseholme on the A15 and to a greater extent at the Holdingham roundabout, where we enlarge the roundabout, improve and increase access and exit space off the road to increase volumes of traffic going through them. We know the A16 is a really important, particularly industrial corridor, around the agri-food sector, but also the travelling community. There's a lot of lorries going up and down there, and these two junctions have been identified over a number of years as pinch points. The Springfield scheme in particular is going to be very complex to deliver. While it's great news this is happening, I would point out that I think traffic management is going to make travelling on this route while the work's done difficult. And the only real snag I think that's come out of the scrutiny and the public consultation process, which I'm sure Andy and Sam will go into more detail, is around sustainable transport across the Spalding Springfields roundabout. There was an ambition locally to improve the footway cycleway access across it. It's quite busy getting from one side of the town to the A151 the other and the McDonald's and going that way. However, I think the team have looked at it quite extensively, and there just isn't space to put a footbridge in within the scope and scale of this project. But in terms of the travelling public, you know, improving access for HGVs, it's going to make a real difference along this segment of road. And I know colleagues have driven it, say to me on a regular basis, these roundabouts are very susceptible to high volumes. They very quickly get busy, and I know locally these schemes are being very well received. But I'll hand over to Andy and Sam behind me to talk through the detail.
Not a lot to add to that overall introduction from Councillor Davis, other than to sort of stress that this does show the recognition of our evidence base in terms of where and when funding pots become available. We are well placed to actually make the right interventions. And the point that Councillor Davis ended on in terms of the engagement with the business sector, particularly the logistics sector, the food sector in this area, they do recognise these improvements are going to deliver some significant benefit. There are often sort of like noises in the press in terms of why don't we dual the long stretches of the A16 and the A17. We've demonstrated with previous work, such as at Riseholme, that actually if you deal with the roundabouts, the increase in flow is significant. It keeps the traffic and transport moving, and we all know that the costs of actually dualling large tracks of our network are significantly more expensive. So in the context of the funding pots that become available, this is a cost-effective way of making a significant difference that then brings benefits for our economy. The other thing in terms of engaging with business, we have put a lot of time and effort into actually having those conversations with local businesses to be honest and open with them about the impacts during the construction period, whilst recognising that, again, it's important that those businesses can continue to operate effectively in that area. But I'll let Sam go through some of the technicalities of the actual scheme.
Thank you and good morning. Apologise, my voice is going a little bit, so I'll do my best. But yeah, I'll take the papers read and just pick out some of the summarised elements. So this is 2 of the schemes as part of the 5 schemes in the Levelling Up Fund programme. 2 of them are on site now, so that's the Boston Marsh Lane and Boston Active Travel, and these are the next 2 to start. So we're looking at starting Springfield Road roundabout in September, October this year. That will be a period for 12 months on site, and I'll come on to what that means from a traffic management perspective, where most people will be sort of interested from the travelling public. Greensell roundabout we're due start in July next year. So that will mean there's a 3-month crossover where both works are on the roundabouts at the same time, and there have been some local concerns, and I get that because they're adjacent. But on the Greensell roundabout, a lot of the works are offline, so away from the carriageway in the field where we're lifting up. So that 3 months when the both schemes are on site at the same time, Greensell won't have any restricted traffic management on the road. We'll be working in the field to the side to lift the level up. So although they're on site at the same time, there's only one set of traffic management that will come off at the end of Springfield before Greensell starts. So it will be fairly, as the travelling public, the constraints will move from one to the other rather than at the same time. From a cost perspective, we've been working we've obviously done early budget estimates that went in with the bid itself. Since then, we appointed through early contractor involvement to a contractor, Galliford Try. We've been working with them in building the cost estimate, which is included in this report. So for the two schemes, we're looking at sort of circa 15 million. And that falls within our within the overall levelling up fund pot of 15.5 that we allocated to these two roundabouts within the overall just under 22 million pounds. So we are well within the budget allowance for this. In addition of those two schemes, there's 2.3 million of the circa 15 of risk money. So in essence, with the £500,000 under the 15.5, we're just short of £3 million of contingency, for want of a better word, for these twos. So it's in a fairly positive position. Just touching quickly on traffic management, Springfields, we're far more developed on Springfield roundabout than we are in Greensell because we're well over a year before we start that. But they're likely to go through a similar process. So we're going to start in the southwest quadrant of Springfield and then effectively work anti-clockwise around the roundabout, doing it in segments as we go through. Through the day, we won't be putting any, at the moment, we're still going through to make sure it's feasible, but at the moment we're not looking at putting any temporary traffic lights or road closures on any of the forearms during the day. What we will be doing is putting lane closures. To stress, that's not road closures, that's lane closures where, for example, you've got 2 lanes at the moment, we'll go down to 1 lane to give working space to work in the area. There will likely be a need for some localised road closures or one-way closures, not on the A16 on the routes to the side, or traffic lights, but that will be at night. We're planning those at night at this stage. So there will be a level of disruption, but just like when we did Rhizome Road roundabout, there was a lot of fears there, similar sort of traffic management, similar sort of flows of traffic and what we were doing. And generally, yes, there was an impact, but traffic wasn't hours and hours of queuing through there, similar to when we did Holding a roundabout as well. So I think that summarises the report on where we're at, other than what Andy picked up about engagement. We have engaged with a lot of the local businesses. We've been working with the district in connection to those businesses as well, and the Freight Association, local freight distribution networks, and the Institution of Logistics and Transport. So we're very aware of those that are going to be impacted, and being open and honest and saying, yes, of course it's going to impact, but we're going to minimise it and mitigate it as much as possible to deliver the schemes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I believe we've got Councillor Brooks on the screen. So Councillor Brooks, have you just report on what was discussed at your scrutiny committee, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Leader. The committee considered this at its meeting on the 22nd of May 23 and fully supported, unanimously supported the recommendations to the executive for this much needed work, and the comments of the committee have been circulated to you. The points focused on by the committee were on a letter received by the committee by Pedals, the Spalding Cycle Action Group, suggesting ways of providing a crossing to improve road safety across there because of their concerns over walking and cycling traffic across the A16. And the suggestion of the provision of a walking and cycling bridge over the A16 at the Springfields roundabout, but it was explained that there was extreme engineering challenges around the levels, ditches, land ownership, etc., and significant costs required for the land purchase and planning permission to install. And all of these statutory activities, etc., would extend far beyond the time that we got to spend this allocation of levelling up fund money. And also the costs were prohibitive at this time as well. The other suggestion was to include a pedestrian crossing across the A16 at that roundabout as well, but it was explained that such a crossing would counter the benefits of providing the extra lanes, etc., around the roundabout. We'd be speeding the traffic up on one hand and then slowing it down with the signalised crossing on the other hand. And it was emphasised that the existing crossing points were being enhanced by adding tactiles and footway markings and signage there. So there would be, the footway crossings would be improved in that respect. There was also assurances given to the committee that a thorough road safety audit process is in place and that there's 3 stages to that audit process, one which has already been completed and 2 more to take place, that audit would pick up any issues or problems around the safety of people crossing the road. It was inquired whether a subway had ever been considered, but that was explained that was extremely costly and ongoing maintenance, etc., was expensive, and it would encourage antisocial behaviour. Through experiences that subways do encourage antisocial behaviour. Then members did emphasise on the importance of considering options to deliver a crossing facility as some form to deter younger persons from crossing the road and to increase the safety for cyclists and pedestrians and to decrease the risk levels of a serious accident occurring. But it was again highlighted that further interventions could be considered outside of this funding process and if it was proved necessary, and members were satisfied and in agreement with the assurances given, and as I said previously, unanimously supported the recommendations to the executive for this much needed improvements. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And they have, I just say the comments have been circulated as well. I just want to pick up on the last point that was made there, that I fully accept that you can't try to engineer into these schemes the issue about cyclists and pedestrians, but in the future, subject to funding constraints, presumably something could be organised, planned away from the roundabout so that people could cross over. I mean, I'm not making commitment here, I'm just saying that could be looked at in the future when funding permits.
Yeah, to be clear, as I was in the scrutiny, this scheme doesn't predicate anything being added in the future. So we're just saying it's very difficult to include in this scheme for the reasons outlaid by Councillor Brooks.
Is there anything being looked at, or are we just waiting for funding, or what?
So there was a very early feasibility that looked into the option of a footbridge. The desire line is on the north side of the roundabout, but we have issues about land ownership because on the north quadrant where you would land the footbridge down is where the environmental and the noise mitigation bund is for Springfield's retail park. So you'd have to integrate with that and look into land take. Equally on the north east quadrant, you would conflict potentially with I think it's the McDonald's restaurants and other facilities there. So you have to get into land ownership and accessibility. If you put it on the south side, you'd need to cross the pedestrians over. Fine, we can look at that. But on the southeast quadrant, that land there actually has an extant planning permission from 10, 15 years ago. It hasn't been built, but it's still extant. So we wouldn't be able to do. So you'd have to put it about 100 metres south of there. And then you get into questions of would people use it if it's not on the desire line or just go across the roundabout anyway. So I think the answer would be to put it on the north side, which is where the ideal place, but you'd have to get into really detailed discussions about planning, land ownership, environmental things, all that kind of stuff. It's not insurmountable, but it's not a small project. It's a major project in its own right.
So, I mean, I think you'd only need one, wouldn't you, for example, for a cycleway, but for future consideration. And the other one is obviously these are very busy roundabouts. I know some people elsewhere in the county think they have busy traffic problems, but this is a really busy, especially with HGVs. So, can I just talk about the mitigation? Obviously, you've looked at overnight working, and you just talk a little bit more about, you know, you're just going to use road lane closures and not overnight. Can you just explain your thought processes there, please?
Yeah, so we're in the process of finalising the plans for those, and we're actually looking to put those plans on the webpage when they're ready. We don't want to put it too soon if things are still generating as we go through, and we'll keep active engagement with the travelling public and the local residents around it. But effectively, we're starting in the first activity is to take all the splitter islands away. So that's the islands between the roundabout to give us the space to move traffic back and forth. So we're going to take those down and then start in the southwest quadrant. So we go down to one lane, shift the lanes over towards the east so we can build in the southwest and effectively mirror that as you go around. But there will be a section where once you've widened out, you can put the traffic, but you need to tie it back in with the existing road in the middle. And that's the bit that we do during the nights on traffic lights where you wouldn't be able to keep a free flow of traffic in a safe environment for both building and the public. So we've got the majority of the work taking place during the day under lane closures, not traffic lights, not any restrictions, just at night where we'll probably have traffic lights or potentially one-way closure on some of the side roads going in, but we're still discussing that. And then pretty much mirror that as you go through sort of the 4 quadrants, but 2 sides of each quadrant, if that makes sense, if you're going, which is why it's taken a year to construct what most people think, well, it's a roundabout, but you have to do it so sequentially to make sure you're not effectively destroying the traffic flow on the A16, which you know we wouldn't do. And like I say, this mirrors the traffic management and mirrors the sort of traffic levels that we did when we did Rhizome Road roundabout. That was about a year as well.
Thank you. I'm probably going to demonstrate why you're the highways officer and I'm not, but I use the Holdingham roundabout really quite a lot. And for me, one of the great benefits of it and improvements is the fact that there are traffic lights on the roundabout. Others might disagree, but I think the traffic flows so much better. It doesn't matter which direction it's coming from, it always feels as though it's moving. And being fairly close, living fairly close to these 2 roundabouts, that Springfield roundabout, it's phenomenally busy. And I just wonder why traffic lights haven't been thought about there, because when you've got traffic coming continually from the right or having to wait for traffic from the right, that if you haven't got something in place to stop it, that you can end up sitting for a very long time. So please give me the highways version of why there won't be traffic lights on it.
No problem. So that's one of the options we looked at when we looked at the feasibility of what the scheme might look like. Is one of them was traffic lights. I'll summarise it very easy to say that the modelling that goes through the traffic lights would make it worse. The reason being, there's 2 reasons. If you take Holdingham as an analogy, what you've got is you've got lots of lanes. You've got at least 4, possibly 5 with heavy flows of traffic. Whereas at Springfield, you've got 3 lanes. Yes, there is a flow of traffic. I'm not saying there isn't coming from the west, from Spalding, but it's much lesser. So you could put traffic lights on there, but it wouldn't be as efficient. And because the big difference between this and Holdingham is in order to get traffic lights on, you need to get them spiralised and basically queuing at the lights on the roundabout, and that roundabout is nowhere near big enough. Whereas Holdingham, we have the luxury of being the size that it is to have that sort of arrangement. And just going slightly off topic, but Pennell's roundabout or North Highcombe roundabout that we're doing as part of the North Highcombe Relief Road, that will be traffic lights because that roundabout will be sized big enough to cope with that sort of flow. And generally you have traffic light islands where you've got 5 arms rather than 4 because they work better when you've got 5, which is not a natural number to have when you've got a normal sort of giveaway sort of basis.
Yes, just quickly, because I do travel that route quite a bit, and it is horrendous, the amount of HGVs. And I'm just wondering about diversions, because a while ago, I used to do the A1 quite regularly. And it is quite obvious that a lot of vehicles do come off at Newark to go up the A17, then to find their way up towards Spalding. And I just wondered, is there anything about diverting those vehicles further down the A1 to, say, near to Peterborough and then come back to Spalding? I know they've got to come back, I don't know. But there is, I wouldn't hate to say how many HGVs go along that road every day, because it is so busy. And it's about, I suppose, just trying to divert some off to get to Spalding, but I'm at a loss as to how they would get off the A1 only at Peterborough, but I don't know.
Okay, it is a tricky one, and that's why we don't, well, one of the reasons why we don't want to put any traffic lights or closures on at all. But if we do have to do it, which we do, we would do them at night, so you're talking about a much lower level of traffic. But as you suggest, freight does travel at night, and there is a large number. We will certainly have an appropriate sign diversion route if we do close it, but like I said, we're not looking to close the X16, only traffic lights. It's the minor routes potentially we're looking to, I say the minor, so you've got the A151 on the east, but we're looking to only, if we do close, to close those, not the A16, so they will still be able to gain access through there even at night. If it's the west side coming in from Spalding that's closed, there'll be local diversions suitable for it. If it's the 151, it's a relatively small diversion, much like when we did Peppermint Junction at Holbeach, as you would continue from the A17 up to Sutton Roundabout and then down the A16. But again, I must stress these are planned at the moment only to be at night.
We just won't have to use the road then, will we? We'll have to get to Norfolk some other way.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, strongly welcome this announcement and these schemes. I think this route is obviously strategically and critically important in terms of our agri-food sector and the growing UK food valley proposition. Obviously, businesses have spoken to me about it, and they've been very pleased with the level of engagement that they've had with the team designing these schemes. I would just say that the management of freight movements at night is going to be a challenge, and I think it's really important we maintain that level of engagement with businesses as the schemes have progressed. And I think ultimately there will be some pain, but the gain from these schemes is so enormous in terms of this sector in particular that it is a no-brainer for me. So thank you.
Okay, just come back to, you've obviously considered just closing overnight closures, which in theory, similar to the A17 at the moment, which I know has caused some angst. You've obviously looked at potentially closing, total closure overnight to just let people, could you just talk us through that?
Yes, when I say closure, it would only be the night, obviously, get it back open for the day. And at the moment, we're not looking at any point of closing the A16. So even at night, that would only be traffic lights, not closing that. It's only the roads to the east and west.
Why not? I'm asking why not.
Right, okay. The level of freight that go through there at night is still quite immense that goes through there. So to close them, the alternative diversion route is really, really big. Going down the I think it's the A49 into Norfolk and back round, or diverting on the A1, as Councillor Bradwell suggests. And actually, a lot of the traffic is trying to get into and out of Spalding as a distribution network. So even the diversion routes don't work particularly well. Whereas the east and west, the east of the 151, it's a relatively shorter diversion in going up to Sutton and Roundabout and back down. And quite frankly, if we don't need to close it, we wouldn't want to. It's only as a necessity.
Thank you for that. Any further questions, please? Are we done? Thank you. So recommendations on page 23, which basically we're asked to approve the business case and then progress the schemes and then enter into a contract for the construction of the schemes and then delegating the detail as before. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. So that's agreed. And with that concludes the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.